After you have had an opportunity to experiment with making your own wine, you may naturally decide that it is time to begin creating your own wine recipes. This is quite common. There are a number of advantages to creating your own recipes. For example, you can avoid the hassle of having to look around for a recipe every time you want to make a batch of wine with the fruit that you have available. In addition, you gain the ability to experiment and possibly produce a really original, great batch of wine. Like any recipe, however, wine recipes must have a specific format and certain ingredients in order to be successful. Let us examine it from the point of view of baking a cake. There are certainly hundreds, if not thousands, of different cake recipes. Line them all up and they are decidedly different. In order for a cake to be a cake, however, the recipe must have several basic ingredients. For example, you are usually going to need some type of flour, sweetener, and something to help the cake rise. This is a basic formula that forms the basis of cake recipes. While you may not think of it, it is really a matter of science. A wine recipe is no different. There are certain ingredients that must be included in any wine recipe in order for the end result to work. These ingredients are produce, sugars, water, nutrients, acid, and yeast. First, you will need to start with something to make the wine. Most wines are made from grapes, but you can use practically any fruit or vegetable matter, even herbs if you wish. You can also use concentrated juices as well. In addition, you will need sugars in order to start and support fermentation. If you do not add sugar to your wine recipe, fermentation will not take place, and without that, your wine will not have any alcohol. In most cases, the fruit that you select for your wine will produce the necessary amount of sugar, but that is not the case with all produce. For example, if you are making dandelion wine, then you will need to provide sugar because the produce will not be able to produce any of its own. You may also find that you need to occasionally add some sugar to support the sugar that is provided. Water is essential in order to dilute flavors that may be too strong. Common examples of wines which may need to be diluted with water include blackberries, elderberries, and gooseberries. Nutrients are also essential. Keep in mind when creating your wine recipe that the yeast, which you will add to your wine, is a living organism. As a result, it needs nutrients to thrive and support a healthy fermentation process. Usually, you will need to add some nutrients to your wine. Common examples of nutrients include yeast energizer and yeast nutrient. Do not overlook the importance of acid in your wine. While you certainly do not want to have too much acid in your wine, it does play an important role in the fermentation process. If the acid level in your wine is too low, then the fermentation will not be as successful as it should be. Acid also assists in the stability of your wine. Also, without sufficient acid, your wine may very well develop bacteria and molds that could ruin your wine. Tannic acid and acid blend can be used to help add necessary acid to any wine recipe. Of course, no wine recipe can be complete without yeast. Yeast is what basically does all of the work of converting the produce you have chosen into wine. Without yeast, there can be no wine. You will need to make sure that you have yeast that is specifically designed for winemaking. Do not make the mistake of thinking that you can use the yeast you have in the kitchen for bread making. Even yeast designed for brewing beer will not work for making wine.